Welcome back to This Life Matters, and this is Georgine, and Drew's here with me. Hello. Yes. We've already done this once, but I want to welcome you back from our break, and our guest has joined us in the studio today, Kathryn Johnson. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we are really glad that you're here and appreciative that you're here too. And in our introduction, I didn't really tell the folks what we're going to talk about. I thought we'd just surprise them today.
Yeah.
But you are here. I've asked you to be a guest because of something that you have started, an organization, and I don't know how you describe it, whether you describe it as a ministry, if it's a nonprofit or what it is.
Not a nonprofit yet. I would describe it as a ministry.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you call it Hannah's Hope.
Yes. Correct.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about what is Hannah's Hope.
Hannah's Hope is a ministry to families who have experienced pregnancy loss. So that can range from miscarriage to stillbirth and even early infant death.
Okay. And apparently you have an interest in this.
Yes, I do. Earlier this year in April, my husband and I experienced our first pregnancy loss. And in dealing with all the grief and everything that came with it, I really started to understand how secretly so many people are suffering through this, and a lot of them are grieving quietly. They may not feel comfortable talking about it. And so as I began to work through my own grief, I knew that I wanted to do something to help women who experienced the same thing, and I wanted to be able to redeem my loss and make it something that helped just to glorify God and to help other women. So from that, I got the idea for Hannah's Hope.
Okay. Well, that's a lot that you've just said.
It is.
Okay. And I kind of want to take that apart.
Okay.
What are you thinking about all this, Drew?
I think it's a beautiful thing. Often that is something that's overlooked in ministry. We set up a lot of different things that we want to talk about, that is easy to talk about, but that's not an easy subject to minister to. And so I'm greatly appreciative of the model being set out there, and hope to one day be able to utilize the same model in church buildings.
Right. Well, it's a little bit like breast cancer used to be treated in the 1960s. No one talked about it. It was just kind of swept under the rug. And so we're really trying to bring awareness to people and to help people who maybe haven't experienced a pregnancy loss, but most people know someone who has, because about 25% of pregnancies end in a loss. So just from those statistics, most people know someone who has lost a baby. And so while they may not have experienced it personally, it can help them know how to best reach out to their friends who are grieving and how to minister to them when they kind of feel like, gosh, I don't even know what to say. And so a lot of times they either say the wrong thing or potentially worse, not saying anything at all.
Last week we did a show on Is There Hope After Tragedy? And this week we're going to talk about some of the loss part of this, but also the hope part of it and what you've found about that. I have also had a miscarriage, and I don't know, Andrew, have you had any of your
I have not experienced that
ladies?
As a husband, not of yet, and it's been in my family, my mother and my sister, but never has it affected my direct family.
Okay. And then, as we know, I've also lost a child,
right?
So a grown child, and I would say that my miscarriage, my pregnancy loss, even though it was traumatic at the time, that was in 1977, 78, in that range. I didn't get really any help. I didn't get any support, really, not even from really family. you hear the words, well, it's for the best.
Right.
Oh, that's the
Right.
worst thing, folks, to say to somebody.
Right. People are quick to say that, or, well, this is God's plan, or he needed the baby, or, well, there was something wrong with the baby, and lots of, little trite things that people say because they don't know what to say.
They absolutely
Right.
don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And I've got something that I believe is the right thing to say, but what do you think is the right thing to say?
For me, I think just telling a person that you are so deeply sorry for their loss, that you are praying for them, and then asking, and not just is there anything I can do, but what can I do to help you? Can I bring you a meal? Can I, do something? Can I watch your kids if they have living children? Something to help them, because I think that a lot of times, especially in the church, people look at pregnancy loss and they don't understand that it is a trauma, it is a loss, that there is real grief that sometimes has very long-lasting effects on people. And so they think, oh, well, they never met the baby, so it's, no big deal or whatever.
Or they can have another one.
Right, they can have another one. And the reality is, it doesn't matter how many children you have. You're not going to replace the one that you lost.
Right.
So, I think the biggest thing is to not try to explain it, because it's really not something that can be explained, but just to just really say how deeply sorry you are and that you're praying for them, and to ask how you can best help them while they're grieving.
Okay. That's what I think as well.
And I think also it's important to follow up, because with any loss, we have the funeral, the memorial service, whatever, and then the world keeps spinning, but it doesn't for that family that just lost their loved one. And so in the same way, for people that are grieving a pregnancy loss, months later, my due date was October, and our miscarriage happened in April. And so for me now, I'm seeing babies that should be my baby's age. And so it just brings a whole different level of grief. There's different triggers. And so people, they don't necessarily forget, but they're not thinking about it like the griever is. And so I have a couple of friends who are really good at asking me, how are you doing, or specific questions about how something has affected me. And that just really helps me know that that person cares about me, but they also remember my baby. And so I think there's nothing better than knowing that people that you care about care for you, and they're remembering your child.
That is so true. No matter how old the child is, or the spouse, or the sibling, the parent, whoever you have lost, people go about their lives.
Right.
And, when I lost my son, I thought, surely people can see written right across my forehead, her son just died.
Right.
Yeah.
Surely they're thinking about it as much as I am.
Surely they can tell just by looking at
Right.
me. And I know there were people that looked at me and probably thought, what's wrong with her?
Right.
I remember sitting on an airplane a couple of weeks later, and I never moved. I didn't look at one magazine. I looked straight ahead. I was still in total shock.
Right.
And that's not like me. I mean, I'm immediately looking at magazines, listening to books on tape, talking, sleeping, whatever. No, I remember just staring for like 8 hours.
Right.
It was the most bizarre thing.
Yeah.
I know you can't imagine
No,
that.
I couldn't imagine you just there. But along the lines of something of this nature, I could describe it maybe as a traumatic experience. And how important is it to just have someone there listening to you?
Right.
If you're willing and ready to talk about it, how important is that process, just to have someone listen, not talk to you, but just listen?
Right. For me, it's very important, and everyone grieves differently, so we can't just put grief in a box and say every person should do X, Y, Z. But I started going to a counselor who specializes in pregnancy loss, and we've actually had 2 losses this year. And so for me, it was really important to have somebody who knows about pregnancy loss to say, what you're feeling is normal, or this isn't crazy, or you absolutely are validated in feeling this way. And also to have friends that listen, and friends that are willing to listen to the really uncomfortable stuff, because you can sit and say, oh, I'm doing okay. But then you can start and really open up and get personal and say, these are the thoughts I'm having, or this is how sad I am, and this is how it's affecting my life. And that is a different level of sharing with someone. And so I think it's important for friends to know that if they really ask how you're doing, that they are prepared to hear that and that they're comfortable with it. Even if it means you're sitting and you're crying when you're talking, that's not bad. You know, tears can be very healing, but a lot of times it makes people feel uncomfortable. So I think it's important, but I think people also need to understand that it might not be quite as pretty in a box like they want it to hear.
That's true. And, you know, I was lucky enough to have some friends like that I could, and still do, and still remember. You know, clearly my pregnancy loss was long time ago. And it, you know, I wasn't, I mean, I was 12 weeks, but I really didn't even know I was pregnant, actually.
Okay.
So I knew there was something going on, but I didn't really know. So, and ended up with a surgery and ended up sick afterwards. And, you know, they gave me a spinal and then they made me sit up. So then I had the headache afterwards. Yeah. I had a whole lot more going on at the time that was that I had to deal with than that. So
it's very interesting because not only in my loss, just some specifics. Mine was at about 10 weeks, and ours was technically a missed miscarriage, which means you are feeling fine. You're not having any symptoms of a miscarriage. We had already seen a healthy heartbeat on an ultrasound a couple weeks before, and we went back in for just a routine appointment, and there was no heartbeat. So at that point, they did procedure, a DNC, to remove the baby because infection can be a concern. Yes. So we had known, we had started planning and, you know, circling the due date on the calendar and all of those things. But for some people, it's interesting because I have an ultrasound picture of that baby, and I have it in a frame in my bathroom. And so that's something tangible for me that I can look at. Whereas with our second loss, it was earlier, and so we didn't have an ultrasound picture. But again, I knew I was pregnant and had that due date. And so there's a part of me that wishes I had that picture so that I had something to hold on to. And then there's women who have, stillbirths that are later, and they know the gender and they've named their baby.
Oh, absolutely. They've decorated the nursery.
Right. All of that. And those women, a lot of times they get to actually hold their baby once their baby's born. And that can be really, even as gut-wrenching as it is, very healing for a person to be able to see their baby and take pictures and do those things. So, there's not necessarily positives and negatives, but there's just different aspects to the different stages of a pregnancy when a loss occurs.
Something that some people have told me is that, especially if they are going, say, to a Sunday school class or something that's the same age, and there's all these pregnant women, or anytime you're anywhere that there's a lot of pregnant women.
It is. And today, what's even worse potentially is social media, because my friends I graduated high school and college with. So these are women that are in their mid to late 20s, all very fertile, or so it seems. And my Facebook feed is just pregnancy announcement after pregnancy announcement. And I have started just for myself, removing some people, not defriending them, but just taking it to where I don't see those pregnancy pictures. And yes, Sundays are probably the hardest day for me because I sing on stage. I help lead worship, and so I can look out in the worship center and I see lots of pregnant women and lots of babies, and so there's just those triggers because it just reminds you of what you don't have, or it reminds you of where you should be or how you think. The
child dedications.
Right. The baby dedications are difficult. There is one family in our church that had a baby within a week or so of our due date, and that baby has not yet been dedicated yet, but I have decided that I'm not going to be in the service when that baby's dedicated, whereas my husband, who is grieved very differently than me, he has decided that he wants to be in there because he wants to see that baby, and that is a part of his grief process. But
let's talk about that.
Right.
How the difference
in the spouses. It's very different.
Between
For
men
me,
and women.
I knew I was pregnant from about a little bit after 3 weeks. So I immediately had that connection and that starting to think about the baby and every little twinge, you associate it with it. So you're thinking about it all the time. Where my husband knew I was pregnant, but I didn't really look different. I might have been slightly more emotional, and I did start having a tummy later, but it didn't affect him initially as much as it affected me. So my grief in the beginning was much more raw and more outward, whereas he was more quiet in his grief and more trying to support me. But in October, when our baby was due, we go to a support group called MEND, which stands for Mommies Enduring Neonatal Death.
Yes.
And that October also happens to be National Infant and Pregnancy Loss Awareness Month. So we did a balloon release for our babies that are in heaven. And that was, so it was that month we had the balloon release, and then it was also the month of my due date. And so that for Mark, which is my husband's name, it made it very, very very real, very tangible, like not just that he would have a pregnant wife, but that at this point we should be having a baby in our house. And so he, for the majority of that meeting, he just wept. And it was the first time that he had really outwardly cried over the loss, because I think it was that month that, okay, we should have a baby and we don't. And then when we commemorated our baby on the due date, it was also much more emotional for Mark than it was for me. And not that I was not emotional, but I had been emotional for so long, whereas him, it just kind of all came out toward the end. So,
Andrew, what's your take on this particular aspect?
Listening to Mark's response is probably one of the ways that most men will handle it,
right?
And it's because the bond we form with our children typically start when they're born, when we hold them, and the bond begins then. You know, we do as much as we can as fathers to create a bond ahead of time, but the truth is, until the physical touch becomes involved, it's not as real and it's not as tangible, but we are emotionally attached,
right,
and it also depends on the circumstances as well. You know, waiting for my first son, I believe that I was more in tune and more, I was really, really in tune to the pregnancy and her health, because this was my firstborn son. Not to say that I wasn't as in tune with our first child, period, but had something had gone wrong, I think I would have been, those thoughts went through my head a lot.
Right.
And I did a lot of praying during that time and hoping. And I believe that there's been there's different circumstances that set up that men can react differently depending on how they were raised and how important fatherhood is to them, and what fatherhood was modeled to them. There's a lot of men who are waiting on the opportunity to be a father. Right. And because of that, because they didn't have a father, and because of that, the letdown might be something that could cause them to display their emotions differently than someone who had a good father, and they know they'll get another chance. And then also just if you have other children to pour your attention into.
Yeah, that's true too. But you might not get another chance. That's the thing.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, that's true. There's no guarantees with a pregnancy loss, and that's one of the things that people say meaning well. They say, well, you'll have another, or your time will come, and they're trying to be encouraging, but the reality is they don't know. They don't know. And hopefully, and statistically, most women are able to go on and have a healthy birth, but not all women are, and so I think that's a little bit of a false hope that we're promising.
Now, do you find that with the people that you're ministering to in Hannah's Hope, do you find that there's also people who are going through infertility and maybe have had eggs implanted, but then it didn't work, and so they're looking at that, as a pregnancy loss as well? So have you ministered to anybody like that?
Well, infertility and pregnancy loss are very similar. They're kind of along the same vein, because they're both someone who's just really longing for a child. We give a hope box to a woman who has lost a child, and it has different things to help them work through their grief. So we have not yet really expanded into infertility. However, for myself, I feel like I'm dealing with infertility and with pregnancy loss, because my husband and I started trying to have a baby last November. So we're a year in, and not only do we not have a baby or a healthy pregnancy yet, we've had 2 losses. So we still have that infertility side of trying to have a child, even though medically we wouldn't be considered infertile because we can't conceive. But a conception doesn't guarantee a healthy birth. So they're very similar in that the heart desire is to have children, but it is a slightly different ministry, and so far we have really only worked with miscarriage and stillbirth.
Well, I I want to say that I'm sorry for your loss.
Well, thank you.
And I didn't know that you had had another loss. I thought at one time, because you sing in front of the church.
Yes.
And one day I thought, is she pregnant? And then I didn't hear anything else. I didn't know until I saw the article in the newsletter about
private
it
at first.
And so I never got a chance to know that what you were going through. But so I am sorry.
Well, thank you.
And when we come back from our break, we're going to get a little bit more into what Hannah's Hope is and how the ministry works.
Okay, great.
Stay with us and come right back to This Life Matters. Welcome back to This Life Matters, and today we're continuing our discussion with Kathryn Johnson and Hannah's Hope Ministry. But first I want to congratulate you. I know that you have just finished your master's degree.
Yes, I
believe in theology.
Yes, it's a Master of Arts in Theological Studies.
Okay. And what does that mean, and what are you going to be doing with that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. I had always had a desire to go to seminary, even in my undergraduate studies, which was also, I was a religion major with a Bible emphasis. So this was something I'd always wanted to do. So I'm not really sure. I'm just kind of praying about it and seeing what potential next steps are.
Well, what school
I went to Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. It's one of the Southern Baptist seminaries, and it's based in Kansas City.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you go there, or did you do a lot of it online?
Yeah, this particular degree was available online. Okay. So you have to get proctors for exams. You can submit your papers online. There is some audio, video listening to and writing reports of that, reading percentages. And then since you don't have the classroom component, you do a lot of discussion board online with other students to get that interaction, which is very interesting. So
yes, well, that's really neat that people can do that now, and you don't have to actually be there all the time. Some programs you fly in and out.
Yes.
So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
It's a very major thing to have accomplished.
Thank you.
Especially this semester, you just are graduating.
Right.
Have you walked through yet?
I walk on December 13th.
Okay.
So it's coming up.
And with all that's been going on this year, it's really amazing.
Thank you. It really, sometimes I look back and I think, how did I do that? How did I function?
Yeah.
And, with work and school and grieving and all of that. And I just, the grace of God is all it was.
Well, you've had a lot of support, obviously.
I have, very much so. And my husband has been fantastic.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about Hannah's Hope and how that works. How do you find out about people? What's the process?
Right. So finding out is a little bit tricky because, as we talked about before, pregnancy loss, sometimes it's kind of kept secret. People grieve silently. So some of it is word of mouth. We have found, surprisingly, that most of the people we minister to are people that we're hearing from someone else, someone saying, I have a friend who had this, so how can I best help that friend? So a lot of them are not church members, but it's church members' friends. So I also am in touch with our minister to preschool because she knows a lot about that, and so she'll tell me if she knows of losses that happen in our church. And so we have a website, and there's a form there that can be filled out to request a hope box.
What's the website?
The website is tulsafbc.org/Hannah's Hope.
Okay.
Yeah. So they can go there, and it kind of talks about our ministry, and there's a way for people to register for a box. Most people that have a box, from what we've seen, they don't want to fill the form out for themselves. And so people will go in, and with whatever information they know about the family and their loss, they'll give us that information, and then we will give the box to the friend who can deliver it to the person who's lost the baby.
Okay. Where did you get the name Hannah?
I got the name Hannah's Hope from 1 Samuel, where Hannah prayed and hoped for a baby. And so many women who lose babies, they do the same. They're praying and they're hoping, and they continue to do that after a loss. So they're not only grieving the life that they lost, but they're also grieving the hope and the plans that they had for that baby and for their life. So through Hannah's Hope, it's helping grieving women by taking some of that burden of grief and replacing it with hope that they can find in Christ.
Okay. What is the hope box? What do you mean by hope box?
Okay, so a hope box, when women lose babies, they don't have something to hold. In normal labor and delivery, you will leave the hospital with the baby in a car seat, and you will go home and you will put the baby in a nursery. When you have a stillbirth, early infant death, or a miscarriage, your arms are empty. So we put together a box that has some items in that are tangible, that help a woman to remember her baby, to know that someone cares, and to give her something to hold because her arms are empty. So some of the things in the box, we have a book that's called Grieving the Child I Never Knew. And that's just a 30-day study through grief, and really helps women proactively work through a lot of the things that grief may throw their way that they may not have realized. So instead of being surprised by grief, that kind of helps them work through those things so they not as many triggers, I guess. And then we place a Gideon's Bible in memory of each baby that is lost. And so someone did that for me, and that was just really special, because I knew that because of the life of my baby, even though it was not as long as we would have hoped, someone got the gift of the gospel. So we put that in there, and we put the baby's name on it if they've named their baby. We give them a little stuffed lamb, a little plush stuffed animal. It's just something kind of sweet that they can hold or sleep with if they want to. We give them a Christmas ornament that they can keep and put out every year to remember their baby. And then we also have some things like a card that has scripture on it that deals with grief and hope. And we have another card that has a list of songs, because a lot of artists today have dealt with miscarriage and stillbirth, and so they have written out of their grief songs that provide hope. And so we have a list of those because they're very specific and they really minister in that way to women.
Okay.
We also give them a little packet of forget-me-nots so that they can plant those seeds in memory of their baby. And then we have partnered with a couple of Etsy stores online that give pieces of jewelry, necklace that says hope on it, that they can have a discount on that.
Okay.
So those are the main things. We also, depending on if it's a church member or not, we will maybe put a personalized handwritten card in there, and sometimes do a gift card for a meal out for the couple so that they don't have to, one less thing to worry about.
Okay. So did you make yourself one?
I did not.
Oh,
but a lot of the things that were in the box are things like I had a stuffed lamb that I had already bought for my baby, and so that was something I had as a keepsake. And then the Bible, and so there were things like that had helped me that I knew would potentially help another woman. So that's kind of how the box was inspired.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Andrew, I saw you kind of perking up at some of these things, especially maybe the songs. I'm not sure. What do you think about that list?
I think that is an excellent idea, especially the songs, because there's so much like she explained, that artists go through it, and that's the point of an artist expressing himself or herself, and putting it all out there. So that's one way to not feel alone, because if you isolate and you think about what you've gone through, and there could be a lot of downtime for you to isolate, and if you could just put on some music that proves to you that you're not alone in this process, that's one more time where you won't give the devil that foothold. You won't have the opportunity to slip into depression or go a negative direction with things. So
that's one thing that you said about feeling so alone. And I've noticed over the years in my practice, most people that come in think that they are the only ones going through, feeling the way they feel about something they're going through.
Yes. It's really interesting. Once I had a loss, and we chose to grieve pretty publicly, and it's been really remarkable how many women have reached out to us just from seeing us say, we've had a loss that have said, I haven't, that have been private in their grief, but then they feel this immediate connection and this, oh, you've gone through this too, and it helps in and not feeling alone. And so I think it's really important, and not everyone needs to, share about their grief if they're not comfortable with that, but it's important that we are open enough that we don't let ourselves get isolated, because the truth is there are so many women and families who have experienced the same thing, and most of them want nothing more than to be able to support someone else who has experienced that. And it's healing, I think, to use our grief to help other people. So for me, when I put a box together, I'm very sad for each family, but it's also a way for me to feel like that I'm redeeming the loss that I had, and it's kind of healing for me as I put that together for someone else. So I think it's very important that we don't cut ourselves off, and if we don't deal with it when it happens, eventually it's going to catch up with us. We have one family in Mend, and they had a first loss, and the husband talks about how he didn't really deal with it. And he said it was about 8 years later before he really had to deal with the repercussions of that grief that he didn't work through. And so I think that we have to understand that it is a real loss. It is valid, and that the best way to do it is not alone. So
along those lines, how do you deal with someone, if you have a couple, or maybe just the woman who says, I don't want to deal with this. I want to forget. I want to move on. I just want to forget about this and pretend it never happened, because it's really not that big of a deal. How do you deal with that type of situation?
Well, I really encourage people to go to a support group like Mend, to get counseling, even if they think they're okay. Most of the time there are going to be triggers, there are going to be things that's going to interrupt them in their life. And some people can adapt better to grief. Some people are more consenting to grief as opposed to experiencing. That's one way of looking at it. So some people may see what happened and kind of be able to separate themselves a little bit and adapt to it and see it as, well, that happened, so what am I going to do now? Whereas other people are much more experiential in their grief, and it's a part of their everyday life. But I certainly think that when a person says that, I have to think that that's not entirely everything that's going on within her heart. So
outside of what the doctor would tell you as far as your physical limitations and things of that nature, what is a good emotional time period? You think that, is there a set time that you would say someone would have to wait, or you would suggest someone would wait before they try again?
That's something that is really up to each couple. Some people, it helps them to try again sooner because it gives them something to focus on, something positive. Not that they're ignoring their loss or not grieving, but it also is providing that hope. But then some people, really, it takes them several months. They want to feel like they have worked through that more fully before they start trying again. We started trying again as soon as our doctor gave us the clear. Didn't mean that I grieved any less or that I forgot our baby, and I didn't, and I haven't. I'm still grieving, but it does give you something kind of positive to look at and to look forward to.
I'm thinking as I see you with Hannah's hope and what you've done, and that's very important for you to do. And as I've said on our show before, it's, what am I going to do with this experience?
Right.
And so what you've done is a couple of things. Is you are helping other people, you're helping yourself as well.
Right.
But also as a tribute to your child that you lost, it's doing something like that. That's important for people to do.
Right. Yes.
And it helps with the grieving process.
It does. And one thing I encourage women to do also is to do something to remember their baby. I chose to, I bought a ring, and I have a birthstone of each of our babies in that ring. Some women choose to plant a tree. I have a friend who has lost 3 babies, and she planted a tree, and her losses were years ago, but she still some days grieves for them more openly than other days, and she may choose to go and sit by her tree. And so there are different things, especially with the holidays coming, that people can do to help remember their baby so that they feel like their baby's not forgotten. And so I really encourage women and men in their grief to figure out what that is and what they may feel most comfortable with in a tangible way to remember that life.
Have you noticed that, we've talked about earlier in the first segment that you notice that men and women do grieve differently, and it's been my experience that women are much more open to discussing it. Men are more open to doing activities to grieve.
Yes. In our support group, that there have been men that have said that projects, that's what they do. They like to have a project, do something like that. My husband isn't necessarily a project guy, but when we initially lost our first baby, he got online and was reading how to support a wife during a loss, so I think that they want to try to fix and do.
Yes, they do.
And they can't always, fix things. And this is certainly something that can't be fixed, but they can help and they can do something for themselves, whether it's making, a patio or whatever that they want to do to help with their grief. So.
Or even sometimes doing something that they think they would have done with that with that child.
Right, absolutely. And this year, Christmas is coming, and so we should have a baby and we don't. And so we're trying to think about how we want to remember our baby at Christmas. And we talked about that in our last Mend meeting. And one of the things they suggested was having a small Christmas tree, like have your normal Christmas tree, but then maybe have a mini tree that you can put an ornament on either each year or however long you want to keep that tree in memory of that baby. And so people had talked about different things. They had a stocking for their baby, or they put their baby's name on their Christmas card and things like that. And so Mark and I, we talked about what we wanted to do. And it was interesting because I said, well, what would you like to do? And asked him that. And he said, well, I really liked that idea of the doing the Christmas tree. And that had been the same thing that had been appealing to me. So we're going to have a little mini Christmas tree for our babies this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about the first baby. Did you name your first baby?
We have not. That's been a real kind of a struggle for me. A lot of women that have losses before they know the gender, they'll choose to do a gender neutral name and they'll name that baby.
Did you know the gender?
No, we did not know the gender. I believe the statistic is 85% of pregnancy of miscarriages are male babies. And maybe 80%. I can't remember. But so, and we had kind of thought that our baby was a boy. That was not, I can't say just mother's intuition, but we had just kind of figured it's probably going to be a boy. And so that statistic was, I thought, okay, well, maybe we were right.
Go with that.
Go with that, yeah. And then the second baby, I had really felt early on that it was a boy. I just kind of had this, I think that this baby is a boy before we lost the baby. So we haven't named our babies yet. Not that we won't, but there just hasn't been a name that I have felt like this is it. This is what I want to name our baby, and this is the name. So
when you do your Christmas tree, then do you have an ornament for baby 1 and baby 2?
Right. We haven't selected. I'm sure we'll probably go and buy an ornament this year for each baby. And then I do have some ornaments that have been given to me that have an angel on them that are carrying a baby, which are really sweet. And so I'll definitely hang up one of those. And I'll probably hang one of our Hannah's Hope ornaments up, which it's a little angel ornament.
Okay. So. Okay. So you put that, but you may have those it's the same ornament in each one.
And each box is the same. Yes, it's an angel.
So if someone wanted to get in touch with you, they could go through the website.
Absolutely.
Which is tulsafbc.org/Hannah's. Is there an apostrophe?
There's no apostrophe.
Okay. HANNAHS Hope, HOPE.
Yes.
And okay, I know that you have a scripture as well that you use for Hannah's Hope. And can you tell us about that?
Yeah, our kind of our theme verse is Psalm 139:19, and this is a famous passage that talks about us in our mother's wombs before we were born. So the verse is, "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb." And so this just talks about how even before we were born, God knew us. He knew our days. He created us. He knit us together. And so it's just, again, to affirm that life of that baby. And in evangelical circles, sanctity of life is a big thing. And it's just interesting how there's an emphasis on the life of the unborn and so much publicity against abortion, and then with pregnancy loss, it's just kind of quiet, which is the other side of that pregnancy loss. So we're just really trying to affirm to women that those babies were known and loved by God.
The babies mattered.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for being our guest today. And, you know, my favorite verse is "You are beautifully and wonderfully made."
Yes.
And Kathryn, I think that about you.
Well, thank
And I
you.
think you're very brave.
Thank you.
And you've really touched my heart today.
Thank you,
And I
Georgia.
know that you've touched other people that are listening and given them encouragement and hope. See, I'm kind of getting teary here.
Oh, I do all the time. So
I do too. But that's okay. We won't
Yeah.
edit
absolutely,
that out.
that's okay.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
that's
You know,
the big thing is that is okay.
yeah, it is okay. So, do you have any closing words, Drew, that you want to say?
Same thing you were saying. Thank you, and I am sorry for your loss.
Well, thank you.
I just I pray and hope that you and your husband go on and continue in this ministry and continue to bless everyone.
Thank
I
you.
mean, this is a good example of what we should do. We get back up and we fight and we help others.
That's right.
And we give out of our need, and I believe what you're doing is a beautiful thing, and it's what God called you to do. And so thank you once again
Thank you
for
very
not only
much.
just doing the show, but for making a choice to help so many people.
Yeah.
You don't even know how many people you're going to help, yet.
Right.
And this is a beautiful thing to take on that task of this ministry.
Well, thank
So.
you. I appreciate that.
Again, thank you for being here
Yes,
today.
thank you for having me.
And we'll look forward to seeing what goes on in the future
Yes,
with Hannah's
yes,
Hope. And,
absolutely.
And good luck with that and
Thank you.
with everything. Congratulations again on
Thank
your
you.
master's degree.
Yes.
And so stay with us, and we'll be right back to This Life Matters.